Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. And today we are talking about the American Revolution and kind of the before scene, and then talking about some of the events and and then talking about its significance. So um let's get into this. Share screen. All right. So the American Revolution, chapter 3, lesson 4. So we're back in chapter 3, but we're just talking about the American Revolution. And the events, the topics discussed should be review for you all from 8th grade. So let's get into it. That was your warm up. Okay, we're going to identify Enlightenment political ideals embodying the American Revolution and the formation of the USA. All right, so where are we? And the 13 colonies look just like this around, you could say 1763 is what our country looked like. All right, a British backstory, the colonies. So picking up where we last left off, the Glorious Revolution, right, ended in 1688. And it resulted with a document called the English Bill of Rights that affirmed Parliament's rights to make laws. And as a result of this, the monarch and Parliament shared power together. The monarch chose ministers responsible to the crown who set policy for governing the country and guided Parliament to make laws, levy taxes, and to pass the budget, indirectly influencing the monarch's ministers. And so the United Kingdom of Great Britain came into existence in 1707 when the governments of England and Scotland were united. They were joined together, obviously, early 1600s under the Stuart dynasty, because they were both, the kings of England and Scotland. And they operated with their own distinct governments, even though they shared the same monarch. But now, following 1707, the term British included the Scots and the English. So the Stuart dynasty ends in 1714 when Queen Anne died without an heir, and a new one needed to be established. So the crown was offered to the nearest relatives, Protestant rulers from the German state of Hanover. And I think I did a little quick lookup of who the next kings were going to be. And there were 53 other people who claimed that they had a right to the throne of England, but they were all Catholic. And as we learned, Catholics and Protestants don't mix. So they didn't want to give it to another Catholic. So they chose the Protestant rulers from the German state of Hanover. The first Hanoverian king, George I, did not speak English, nor did his son, George II. And neither of those people were able to understand the British government to some capacity, so their chief ministers were allowed to deal with Parliament. In the meantime, this is like during high time industrial revolution. The growing trade and industry led to an ever-increasing middle class who favored the expansion of trade and of Britain's world empire. They found a spokesman in William Pitt the Elder, who had become head of the cabinet in 1757. If you recall, that guy, he expanded the empire after acquiring Canada and India in the 7 Years' War, which we talked about last unit. In North America, Britain controlled Canada and its 13 colonies on the east coast of modern-day USA. They were populated with about 1 million people by 1750 and were pretty prosperous. In theory, the British Board of Trade, the Royal Council, and Parliament controlled the colonies. In actuality, as we've learned, this should be a little bit of review. The colonies had their own independent legislatures. For example, merchants in port cities like Charleston, Boston, and New York did not want the British government running their affairs. And if you think about it, the Atlantic Ocean is a big body of water that separates England from the east coast of the United States. It takes a long time to get there. So it's kind of hard to enforce laws so far away. I mean, but Britain will do their darndest. All right. So when the two united in 1707, you got the England flag, the Scotland flag, and then you got this British flag. But then they added Ireland, and that's what the current Union flag looks like. Okay. So Great Britain is all of these. Well, it's just the islands, if you look at it. Great Britain is just Scotland, England, and Wales. All right. The United Kingdom includes Northern Ireland, Scotland, England, and Wales. The British Isles include the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland, England, Wales. I know, it's a headache. So these are the first two kings, George the First, the guy from Germany, not English, guy from Germany, and his son, George the Second. All right. After the 7 Years' War, British leaders wanted to get new colonial revenues from the colonies. These revenues would then be able to be used to cover the costs of war and pay the expenses in maintaining an army to defend these colonies. So in 1765, the war ends in 1763. 1765, Parliament imposed the Stamp Act on the colonies. This act required certain printed materials such as legal documents, newspapers to carry a stamp showing that a tax had been paid to Britain. Opposition was widespread and violent and very much often. So it was repealed 1 year later in 1766, ending the crisis, but the cause of the dispute was not resolved. Colonists were not happy. And crisis after crisis followed in the 1770s. To counteract British actions, the colonies organized the First Continental Congress, which met in Philadelphia, urging the colonists to take up arms and organize voluntary militias. Fighting finally erupted between the colonists and the British Army April 1775 in Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts. The Second Continental Congress met afterwards to set up an army called the Continental Army, and George Washington was our first commander-in-chief. So, bring me my money. I don't know if you've ever seen this GIF, but anyways. So, if you want to, not want to, if you recall, this is Britain right here, all the way up. All right. The other pink colors are British colonies. All right. All of this, India, Australia, Canada, 13 colonies. All right. That's a lot to maintain for Britain. So then you have these little rebellions happening across the Atlantic, and it's going to divert their attention. All right. The Stamp Act. Here's some protests. It's not talked about in your book, but the Boston Massacre happens in 1770. And then the Boston Tea Party, where colonists dressed up as Native Americans in the middle of the night and dumped a fresh new load of tea into the harbor. Now, it's not to say that there weren't resistances happening over and over again across the 13 colonies, but in Boston, in the Northeast, that's where most of the revolutionary ideas and took root and really took hold. And here's Paul Revere, looking like a young Jack Black. You know, he would notify the townspeople if the British were coming, and they would put a lamp in the church steeple. 1, if they came by land. 2, if they came by sea. I do declare. So, although the revolution had begun, the colonies had yet to declare their independence. Many patriots were still loyal to the king, however, and in January 1776, their public opinion began to change. Thomas Paine published a persuasive pamphlet called Common Sense. Being born in England, Paine strongly believed in the rights of the people to govern their own affairs and to separate from the rule of a monarch. In his book, Common Sense, oh my gosh. In his book, Common Sense, Paine argued that monarchies had to be set up. And when they were set up, they seized power from the people. And the new king, King George III, was a tyrant, someone who abuses their power. And it was time for the colonists to declare independence. George Washington noted that in Common Sense is working a powerful change in the minds of men. Within 3 months, Common Sense sold over 100,000 copies. You know, he was top of the list on Amazon. One by one, the provincial congresses and legislatures told their representatives at the Continental Congress to vote for independence. So July 4th, the Second Continental Congress approved the Declaration of Independence, chiefly authored by the one, the only, Thomas Jefferson. And the American Revolution formally begins. So that's T-Pain, but that's the real T-Pain, Thomas Paine, the OG. And that's his book. All right, influential. So the Declaration of Independence contains very important legal and political ideas. It states in its first paragraph, all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that those rights are of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Sounds a lot like John Locke, just saying. In simple terms, this formed the legal foundation for the principles of equality before the law and individual rights. And the impact of these legal ideas is immense. Unlike later governing documents of the U.S., the Declaration of Independence, DOI, includes broad statements supporting equality and human rights. Today, the Declaration continues to influence human and property right movements all over the world. In its opening line, the DOI spelled out that the U.S. was a new nation, ready to interact with other nations on an equal footing. Politically, the writers of the Declaration of Independence were asserting that a government only existed because of popular sovereignty, or the right to govern through the consent of the people. Additionally, the Declaration firmly states that a government that fails to uphold these ideas of liberty could justifiably be overthrown by the people. John Locke, if I ever heard it, John Locke's ideas. These political ideas expressed in the Declaration of Independence inspired revolutionaries in Latin America, France, and other parts of Europe many decades later. And today it continues to influence revolutionaries and political reformers across the globe. So there you have the Declaration of Independence. All right, hashtag influencer. Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, was an American revolutionary, founding father, and politician. He was heavily influenced by Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke, Francis Bacon, and Isaac Newton. And as a supporter of the Enlightenment, Jefferson distrusted a strong central government, favoring republicanism and having a strong belief in religious freedom and separation of church and state. His Republican political principles and his views on religious freedom would profoundly influence the formation of the United States Constitution in 1787 As a founder of the United States, Jefferson's popularity carried him from governor of Virginia to secretary of state to vice president and to eventually president, serving from 1801 to 1809. Although a strong presidential figure, instrumental in doubling the size of the U.S. with the purchase of Louisiana in 1803, Jefferson also set a standard for the presidency that emphasized weak executive power, meaning he didn't want the national government to have all the power. He wanted the national government to be a little bit weaker, and states should have more power than the central government. So Thomas Jefferson's political writings continue to influence American politics today. So when they think Washington, D.C. is getting a little too powerful, they heavily reference TJ, Thomas Jefferson. All right, major upset. So support from foreign countries was important to the colonies' cause. These nations were eager to get revenge from earlier defeats at the hand of the British. The French supplied arms and money to the rebels. French officers and soldiers also served in Washington's army. So in February 1778, following a British defeat, the French granted diplomatic recognition to the new United States. When Spain and the Dutch Republic entered the war, the British now faced a war with Europeans as well as Americans. So when General Cornwallis was forced to surrender to, that should just be T.O., to the American and French forces under Washington at Yorktown, the British decided to end the war. But it wasn't 2 years later until the Treaty of Paris in 1783 was signed, and it recognized the independence of American colonies. This treaty also granted Americans control of the Western territories west of the Appalachian Mountains all the way to the Mississippi River. So not only did America grow, America grew in size as well. Someone who isn't mentioned in your book who was instrumental in getting the French to support us was the Marquis de Lafayette. And if you've seen Hamilton, he's also in there as well. This is the Yorktown surrender. All right, new country, who dis? After overthrowing the British, the former colonies feared the power of a strong central government. The state's first constitution, test question, Articles of Confederation, 1781, was create a weak central government that lacked power to deal with the nation's problems. So in 1787, 6 years later, delegates are going to meet in Philadelphia called the Constitutional Convention to revise the Articles of Confederation and ultimately decide that we just need to start over, start from scratch, create a new government. So the proposed constitution was created a federal system in which the national government and state governments shared power. Based on Montesquieu's ideas, the national or federal government was separated into three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. Each branch has the power to check or restrain the acts of the other branches. So the three are: the president serves as the head of the executive branch, which is why it's sometimes called the presidential democracy. The legislative branch consists of elected representatives of two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives, and the Supreme Court and other courts formed create the judicial branches. And so 9 out of the 13 states had to ratify it, meaning they had to accept it. So after 9 out of the 13 states accepted it, the Constitution went into effect. So here's the Articles of Confederation. And here are the problems. These are waves, by the way. If you can't, this is a boat. So the Articles of Confederation had no national court system, no power to enforce treaties, no power to enforce laws, no power to raise an army, and the big one, no power to collect taxes, because obviously Americans, right after fighting the British, don't want to be taxed. So, yeah. Tough sailing, rough sailing ahead indeed. This is the Constitutional Convention. This is the Constitution. All right, Master Chief. Although many individuals contributed to the framing of the United States Constitution, the master builder was James Madison. He believed that power should be divided among the national government, state governments, and the people. It was called the Virginia Plan, presented at the Constitutional Convention. And it was a reflection of this idea proposed that the government be divided into 3 branches with equal power. The idea of the division of powers greatly contributed to the federal system currently operating in the U.S. today. Madison thought that dividing the power in such a way would result in a more representative government that was less likely to be tyrannical. And this system has inspired the creation of other federal systems of government throughout the world today. James Madison. All right, Bill of Rights. So, as promised during ratification, the new Congress proposed 12 new amendments to the Constitution. Amendments are changes, and that the states approved 10 of them. Together, these amendments will become what is now known as the Bill of Rights, influenced by what happened in the Glorious Revolution in 1688 with the Bill of Rights that England came up with at the end of the Glorious Revolution. So the first 10 amendments guaranteed freedom of religion, speech, press, petition, and assembly. That's just the first one. They gave Americans the right to bear arms and to be protected against unreasonable searches and arrests. They guaranteed trial by jury, due process of law, and protection of property rights. And many of the Bill of Rights were derived from the natural rights proposed by the 18th century philosophers and your boy, John Locke. So here's an image of the Bill of Rights. You have the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment, not to quarter soldiers, unreasonable search and seizures. The Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment is protect citizens who are accused of a crime. Sixth Amendment guarantees a fair, impartial, and speedy trial. Seventh Amendment guarantees a right to trial by jury. Eighth Amendment prohibits cruel or unusual punishment. Ninth Amendment protects individual rights not listed in the Constitution. And the 10th Amendment reserves rights to the states not yet given. So they were thinking ahead when they came up with the 9th and 10th amendments, but the first 8 were what they really were excited about. All right. Is this the last slide? Yep, last slide. So the significance. The American Revolution was not the first time the people overthrew a tyrannical monarch or broke free from an oppressive nation. See Charles I. However, the ideas that inspired the revolution and new government created were unique. It was the first large and successful revolt that was driven by Enlightenment ideals and that was successful. Again, success. Natural rights, individual liberties, and popular sovereignty, among others, were all ideas of the Enlightenment that inspired a revolt against the British government. These ideas formed the foundation of the government the Americans created after a successful revolution. European intellectuals saw the American Revolution as the confirmation of the premises of the Enlightenment. For many, it confirmed that a new age and a better world could be achieved. The revolution would soon inspire popular revolts in Europe and Latin America. And indeed, many popular revolts over the last 240 years look towards the American Revolution as a model to be followed. And many activists across the globe continue to draw inspiration from the American Revolution and its commitment to Enlightenment ideals of liberty, freedom for all people. And that is going to conclude our lecture. Pretty quick, pretty short, not as detailed as I was expecting it to be. Maybe you might thought we wrote a lot. So yeah, there's that. The American Revolution, the long and the short of it. All right. Your job, your homework, bookwork, in your textbook, page 123, 2 through 4, those 3 questions, 2, 3, and 4. All right. Hopefully you guys did enjoy that. We're going to be moving on to a different revolution across the pond that really should it be considered a revolution or not, but that's for you to decide. All right, if you guys did enjoy that, leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.